Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar that's going to look at induction and mentoring programs. I'm joined today by Karina Poultney-Shaw, our cash product specialist, and Stacey Mann, our early years and childcare subject specialist. And we're going to talk about the different measures that we have taken to make sure that there are adaptations and processes in place for you in terms of mentoring and induction. Thank you. So let's put some context around this then. We know that there have been very challenging times, and those challenging times due to the pandemic have put a lot of strain on our early years and childcare workforce. Placements have been difficult to obtain. And in response to that, students could still achieve and move forward through our knowledge-only qualification. And those knowledge-only qualifications were developed for a Level 2 Early Years Practitioner and also for our Level 3 Early Years Educator qualifications. So whilst we know that the best outcome for students was to complete those qualifications in full, gain their license to practice, and have the opportunity for level 2 to go into the workforce or to progress to level 3, and for level 3 to have that opportunity to go straight into placement, straight from placement into employment at level 3, working within the ratios within the early years foundation stage, or indeed off to university if their qualification also included UCAS points. What we wanted to do is make sure there were alternatives. So moving down from that where that wasn't what wasn't possible, then we could look at a risk-rated approach. So we'll look at that in detail as to what that actually means for students. And in the very possible circumstances where no placement has been possible, or very limited placement that didn't allow students to fulfill the requirements of that risk-rated approach, we've looked at a knowledge-only pathway. So we know what the adaptations are. Let's have a look at how that knowledge-only pathway can still lead opportunities for the workforce. And we'll start by looking at the Level 2 Early Years Practitioner. So what do you do if those students come back with their knowledge-only qualification and ask you, we really want to enter the workforce, we don't want to go on to level 3, we've got a qualification that values what we did, fantastic, but we want to use that now to sort of top up to the full diploma and gain that all-important license to practice. So what we've done is develop a mentoring program that's based around the DFE Level 2 criteria with the risk-rated approach applied, so that this means they will be working alongside the placement. They can go back into placement and they can spend, I'm suggesting here, a term, but it will really be dependent on that individual student to be able to work through this mentoring program with their placement provider. They will need to be registered for the qualification with you as the centre provider, and they will need to have that final sign-off from an assessor within your organisation. But by following this mentoring process, the student can be engaged in meaningful activities in employment with the employer as a student, working through placement in a very sort of intense way. Let's have a look at what that might involve. So they will generate evidence in the workplace. There is no need in this mentoring program for the student to come into college where they neither fit with their second year or first year group. They will complete the mentoring program and they can then bring their evidence into college for that final sign-off from an assessor. They will have expert witness statements that relate to the AMBER criteria that must be triangulated through professional discussion. Student reflections can also contribute to the knowledge base. And the college responsibility, the setting responsibility will be through that quality assurance. Work will need to be sampled and the EQAs will need to be informed, and they will make decisions around whether a review is necessary or whether that student will be able to go straight forward into their claim. So what does the mentoring program look like? So the level 2 early years practitioner can be found with examples of experiences and activities or tasks that are going to provide relevant evidence against the competencies, hints and tips, if you like, for that student who gained their knowledge only qualification, and also a little bit of guidance there for the centre and for the placement provider. All the areas highlighted grey will have been achieved by the student when they were acquiring the knowledge only pathway qualification. There's no requirement for those to be repeated. The mentor, comment and feedback column should be completed by the early years setting, using the student's practice to support them. And this doesn't need to be a lengthy and time-consuming business. We know how busy your placement providers are, but just something to keep a little track record of where they've been able to see the students developing those competencies. And to help the student, you and the early years provider, those competencies have been marked with the color coding, and also some suggestions for evidence has been included. Let's take a look. So, whilst this is a document that perhaps is difficult to see on here, you'll be able to find this on the qual pages. So, for the particular qualification, it's already uploaded there, this document. It can be printed off, and you'll be able to work through all of the criteria that's either green or amber with your student. And this can be done in the placement, but with the full partnership of the placement provider. So if we look at 7.3, for example, support the assessment, planning, implementation and reviewing of the graduated approach of each baby's and young child's individual plan for their care and participation. And then it gives a little bit of an overview. It gives you an alternative of ways that you could do it. And then the student may be able to shadow the care of a child with SEND through the graduated approach. Where this is not possible, the student should be made aware of policy and procedure for SEND in the setting and reflect on the importance of a child-centred practice. Also, it says on there that there are some links to other criteria. So for 7.5, for example, there's an opportunity to look at this document in a holistic way. And then the requirements for the placement mentor is to provide a brief outline of the student engagement with this particular competence. So make sure you're looking at the amber and make sure you're looking at the green. You can almost, in effect, ignore the grey because it will say on all of the grey criteria, completed as part of knowledge only pathway, no further evidence is required. So you don't need to be repeating what the student has already achieved in their qualification, and that values them and reaffirms their position at level 2 study. And now it's looking at just sort of gaining more confidence with that, with the competency-based framework that surrounds the risk-rated approach for the early years practitioner. And we've done a very similar thing with the level 3s. So the early years educator mentoring program follows exactly that same pattern. So students will have finished with a knowledge only, and that could have been for lots of reasons, but the main factor would be that the students have had limited, insufficient or none at all placement experience. Now, those students gaining that knowledge only will have been able to use any of any UCAS points that were attributed to the qualification that they did, and that might mean that they've gone on to university, and they may well then follow a program at university that allows them to capture the early years educator criteria, which is great. Now, in some circumstances, the student may have decided, actually, I don't want to go to university. I want to enter the workforce. I've got a knowledge only qualification. What am I going to do? And in that way, what these students can do is actually work in the same way. So they would work with a placement provider. They would work through that risk rated approach. And there's hints and tips within the document, this time obviously against the level 3 early years educator criteria. So let's have a look. It's going to work in exactly the same way. That partnership must be in place between the provider and the early years setting. That really is pivotal to this being a success. And as you can see here, we've got on the slide a sort of sample picture, a screenshot of what this looks like, and you'll be able to download the document from the Qual Hub, from the qualification page. It's actually on there, ready to be downloaded and used. So if we look at one example, here we go. So we've got one there, looking at 4.1. Which is amber. So this is something that's got to be seen by somebody who knows what they're looking for. And it's about that good command of the English language in spoken and written form. So the alternative here, assessed via expert witness testimony and triangulated with professional discussion with both the learner and the expert witness testimony, through reflection. So you're bringing together lots of different evidence types. Remember, if you are and you will be relying on expert witness statements for this particular approach, then the method must be used with professional discretion, and centre staff should always refer to the guidance detailed in each specific qualification. The breadth and range of activities covered in the qualification means that the assessor may find it useful to draw on testimony of expert witnesses. Bear in mind that this is about validity, reliability, authenticity, and must therefore be triangulated with another type of evidence, professional discussion, using perhaps work products that the student has developed, and also building on policy, procedure, reflection, but always making sure that you as the centre assessor are using the expert witness statement as a stepping stone, a trigger, an initial first point to develop that evidence further. So what have we done for the workforce? We've just had a look there at knowledge only qualifications and what students can do to be able to sort of move on and progress. So at that point, I'm just going to invite my colleagues to say, do you have any questions around the knowledge only pathway?
Yes, Janet, it's Karina here, and I do. So can you sort of outline what is the responsibility of the centre, and then also what is the responsibility of the employer when trying to get that learner their licence to practice, so that practitioner their licence to practice?
Yeah, of course, and a really good question that helps us really in a way to summarise the intent of this approach. So the provider so I'm meaning here the centre, so the NCFE Cash Centre, they have the responsibility to register their student. So the student is not the responsibility of the early years setting. They remain under the umbrella and responsibility of the training provider. When it comes to the actual training, this is where it's much more of a partnership, and there is then a responsibility with the employer to look at this mentoring documentation and support that student towards those competencies, and provide expert witness testimonies and comments within the document, therefore being able to give a sort of insight for the training provider of how that individual is progressing. In terms of how long the student is with the placement is something that's decided through communication between the training provider and the early years setting, and also as a mark of progress. So, you know, that communication really is something that's divided in equal pockets, I feel. So the training provider do have a responsibility. It's your student. Let's have some regular phone-ins, for example, to make sure everything's going well. And of course, to check in with the student as well to make sure that they're feeling okay and everything's going as they thought it would as well. But there's also the responsibility for the early year setting to also feedback where things may be going really well, where things may actually be a barrier sort of further down the line. So the responsibility of registration and certification and overall responsibility for that student remains with the training provider. In terms of success for that student, then it's more of a partnership that includes all three parties really. And so communication being key within that, and perhaps the assessor from the training provider being instrumental in making sure that that partnership remains effective.
Thanks, Janet. That was very full of information. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, any more questions?
Just one from me, Janet. How would centres then claim for certificates?
Okay, it's a good question because these students who are coming back in a way to do that sort of knowledge only top up to their full license to practice qualification, they've already had their funding for their qualification. They don't want to sit with first year students. They don't necessarily need to come back into college because that knowledge side has been achieved and they've got their mentoring documentation to be able to liaise with you, but remotely from within their early years setting experience provider. So it's a difficult one in terms of who does that, when does that happen? And it was definitely the responsibility of the training provider. But what I would suggest is that when the training provider and the early year setting have made that they've communicated and they feel, yep, this mentoring document is complete, and you've had any triangulation back in the training provider's establishment in terms of, further reflections, further professional discussions to sort of tie up those expert witness testimonies as appropriate, then I think at that point it would be really advantageous for the training provider to talk to their EQA and to talk to customer services to enable them to progress along their journey for claiming the qualification. So I think it can be done in stages, but I think communication by the training provider with their EQA, what do we need to do IQA wise? What do we need to do EQA wise? Is there any processes to follow? And how then do we claim for a certificate, an APL, for example, the knowledge over, and how does that work is something that's best discussed with the customer support team.
Thank you.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. So what we're going to do now, we're just going to move away from those knowledge only pathways and just think about the students that did qualify during these pandemic times and actually how they really will have been disadvantaged in a little way in terms of not having that full richness of placement experience. So we have students that have completed their full qualification, albeit through limited time in placement and through a risk-rated approach. So they're going into jobs at level 2 and they're going into jobs at level 3 accordingly. And they will be joining a very, very, very busy workforce, a workforce that is, because of the pandemic, working on skeleton staff, a workforce that needs qualified people, but a workforce that is relying and depending on qualified people to hit the ground running. We're very aware of that. So what we've done is we've thought about what possible intervention can we sort of develop to help those newly qualified practitioners, professionals, to be able to find their feet, if you like, in that first induction period. And we've come up with an early years practitioner induction program. So this will help the employer and the newly qualified practitioner to actually settle into post and also reflect on their day-to-day duties and tasks and experiences, identifying in the first place where they feel they have the strengths. So a very honest reflection of where am I in terms of this this criteria? What do I feel confident with? And being very honest, you know, if somebody is asking that student or that professional to actually sing or tell stories, how confident would I feel? So we take the newly qualified professional through some of these criteria and ask them to be self-reflective in a very honest and very open way, so that they can then begin to build up those skills and talk to their mentor, talk to their supervisor, their buddy or key person within the setting that they've been sort of assigned to. And that will also lead to further supervision and further appreciation of a newly qualified member of staff. Let's have a look. So this is what we're calling a risk-rated self-analysis. Let's take a look at it. So in here, very, very similar to the risk-rated approach that you saw for the knowledge-only students, this is for professionals, and it's now looking at that saying, we know you've qualified in these different areas, but now go through them. So in that first column, you've got the early years practitioner criteria from the DFE, and then you're sort of going through it, risk rating yourself, this self-analysis. And you've got to be very honest. What would you mark as red? Limited, no or limited experience. So, you know, if your confidence levels are low, then you've got amber if you feel you'd benefit from further wider experience. And then if you think I wouldn't have any problem if I was doing that independently, you could mark as green. So the professionals, the newly qualified professionals, are going through and they are risk rating in this way. Thank you. Very important that that information then is used, and it's used to enable reflection. Maybe then that supervision will allow signposting for particular areas or wider reading as appropriate, and it's really instilling supervision as well as that cycle of continuous professional development. And here we have a sample of what that document might look like. So you may have some red or amber criteria. What is that? What is your concern? What would you like more experience of, and why? What do you think you could do? So we start to reflect, and then we start to plan and think about what we can do to make that better. And that could be something that's done in really good close communication with the mentor to really sort of help to make those links and connections in those early days as well. The mentor can give some feedback. They might be able to encourage, they might be able to suggest you work on things together or that you shadow. So many different things that can be done to help that new member of staff. And that investment will really reap rewards when that employee begins to take things on in a more confident and competent way, having learnt from their mentor. Next steps, what are we going to do to be able to make sure this happens? And this is absolutely more or less mirrored in the early years educator. So again, these students are qualified. They've met the risk rated early years educator criteria. They've met all of that in some way, shape or form, but they are likely to have done so in reduced hours. Therefore, they have missed that richness that really just helps them to blossom for work. So let's have a look. So the absolute same process. So this time they are looking at the early years educator criteria, and they will go through this criteria. I've noticed on the slide it says early years practitioner criteria. You'll be looking for the early years educator criteria, and that's on the qualification page. And then you're using this in exactly the same way. And so if we look here, we've got exactly the same sort of information here. So feeding back, working closely with your mentor, planning those next steps, beginning to think about the power of reflection, and sometimes the greatest thing is being critical, being self-critical and self-reflective, and being so honest that actually it's okay. What do you feel you've not had the richness of experience doing, and therefore building up that confidence. It's fine to say you've not had experience in everything, and nobody's going to expect that because of these unprecedented times. Okay, so we've come to the end of the webinar. The first part of that was looking at what do I do if I have knowledge only students from a level 2 early years practitioner or a level 3 early years educator qualification coming forward to the training provider to progress onto that license to practice and meet those competencies. And then in the latter part of the webinar, we talked about those newly qualified members of staff and how we could support them through more of a structured approach to induction. So hopefully you found that useful. I don't know if there are any further questions from my colleagues before we close the webinar.
Janet, can I ask, what are the benefits of this approach?
Okay, so there are real benefits here, I think, in terms of an investment in that newly qualified early years practitioner, early years educator. We know that within the teaching profession, we have that NQT, that newly qualified year for the teachers. And that's so that they can build that confidence and build that competence and have time for reflection and supervision. It is equally as important and always has been for those early years professionals. And I think now more than ever, the investments in quality, good leadership that invests in their staff is so valuable and mustn't be underestimated, because that's going to really be an investment and a commitment that reaps dividends down the line in terms of somebody feeling confident, somebody feeling safe and secure in their new job, knowing that they don't have to know everything, knowing that there's somebody there who can support them, knowing that they're going to be mentored and they'll have plenty of opportunity to talk about the things that might be worrying them, to actually build that really positive relationship with their mentor where they can enjoy coaching approaches, and where they feel able to say, I don't know if I could read that story by myself. Can I shadow? That kind of engagement will help that professional to grow and blossom. And in the sort of recent post-pandemic situation, I'm saying post-pandemic, let's hope so. And in this situation, we need to be mindful that these students have had less experience than any of their peers. And so it's important as the early years workforce, just to reflect, recognise and appreciate that here we have a well-qualified, willing workforce, but they will indeed benefit from that nurturing, mentoring, reflective supervision model that indeed we all do in our work.
Thank you.
Okay, so if there's no further questions, I'd like to say thank you to my colleagues. Thank you to everybody for tuning into the webinar. Any questions, please do get in touch. You've got contact names on the slide, and take good care. Bye-bye.